Hey there, and welcome back to the Total Transition Podcast, where we explore the transition journey and especially a focus on you at the center of that. I'm Jordana McGonigal, your host, and every other week we bring you inspiring stories from veterans who have successfully navigated their own transitions and some practical insights from them in all aspects of living fully. This week we're talking with Matt Poepsel. Did I say that right, Matt?
Poepsel, yeah.
Okay, I always worry. I always worry about these things. So we're talking with Matt, and he is the godfather of talent optimization. We're going to have to talk about how you got that title. But after a career in the Marines, he transformed his career to focus on talent optimization and enlightened leadership. He wrote the book, Expand the Circle, Enlightened Leadership for Our New World of Work, and serves as the host of Lead the People podcast, which is great. You should definitely check in at some point. He also serves as vice president and godfather of talent optimization at the Predictive Index, holds a PhD in psychology, an MBA, and a Harvard Business School Certificate of Management Excellence. As if that weren't enough, he is also a part-time faculty member at Boston College, where he teaches in the areas of leadership, human resources, and business spirituality. So, Matt, thank you for taking just a few seconds of your very minimal schedule, apparently, to join us.
Thank you so much for having me, Jordana. I'm so excited to see you again. Always love our conversations.
Absolutely. If you haven't seen before, I think, Matt, I've been on one of your podcasts. I think you've spoken at our Vet Summit before. So we have some history going back, but today is kind of different because we're going to talk about your transition and what that taught you and how you moved through that. And then how we ended up how you ended up in talent optimization and what you can teach, our listeners about that job search and about how, finding the job that really, really fits them. So I appreciate you coming on.
Sounds great to me. It's my least favorite thing to talk about is myself, but if it helps some veterans to kind of learn from my experiences and just kind of even just appreciate sort of what you're going through, then I'm more than happy to share.
Absolutely. So we're going to force Matt into discomfort today for everyone else's benefit. Congratulations. So Matt, let's start. I always start at the beginning, right? It's Alice in Wonderland. Start at the beginning. So how did you end up in the Marine Corps? What was that process like? How did you make that decision? And then what was your career like actually in the Marine Corps?
Yeah, I took a kind of a circuitous route to get there. Although I will say that when I was in 5th grade, there was a group of my grade school friends and we all decided to join the Marines. We said, who's the toughest branch of service in our opinion? And it was the Marines. And we all made that decision to do it. And I think 3 out of 4 of us actually did end up going that route. So that was kind of always in the back of my mind. I remember in my grade school books drawing the parachute wings, the gold parachute wings of the Marines. So it was pretty early days and a little bit unusual as for a lot of service members to kind of have identified something that early on. But then I didn't actually think that much about it in high school. I was busy, doing all the fun stuff and on the wrestling team and not going to school very much and not doing very well.
Not thinking about giving your soul away.
Yeah, 100%. And so somewhere about halfway through my high school tenure there, I decided that I wanted to apply to the Naval Academy. And the year that I was up for selection, there was only one billet for my state of Missouri, and it went to somebody else. And so I was given, in consolation, an ROTC scholarship to go to any college I wanted. But by then I had totally convinced myself I was going to, of course, go to the Naval Academy. So I hadn't applied to other schools. Looking back, Jordan, I have no idea what I was thinking. Like what was happening between my ears, I have no idea. But I applied to the local school in University of Missouri, Columbia. And I went for about a semester and I turned in a 0.7 GPA because I didn't go to class. And the school wrote to me and said, don't hurry back. You're not welcome here.
Fun, but
and as I look back, I really enjoyed the ROTC part of it. The military part I liked a lot, but I just wasn't ready at that point in my life for the school. So I said, well, I've always wanted to be a Marine. I still want to be a Marine. I'm going to enlist. So I did that, and I decided that I have a love of languages. So I committed to being what's known as a cryptographic linguist, a Marine that was learning about code breaking, and in my case, languages. I've always loved languages. And I got assigned to the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, where I learned Arabic. So 67 weeks to learn Arabic, which was an amazing experience. And when I got to my fleet assignment, eventually, after a quick tour through Texas to do some cryptography work, I said, well, I'm already in the Marines. In our view, it was the toughest. Who's the toughest now that I'm here at my duty station? They said, well, that's recon. You're going to have to, pass the physical fitness test, and then you get to jump out of airplanes and do aquatic stuff and all that fun stuff. So, okay, let's sign me up. So I remember there was a 10-mile hike with 80-pound pack, and you had to do it for time. And I didn't know anything really about hiking at that point, and the bottoms of both of my feet blistered off, but I finished the damn hike, and I was able to get in and recover and started my recon career. And they sent me through all kinds of schools, and I was a proper Marine at that point. I finally felt like I had achieved that part of my journey. I felt like I was active, getting ready for my first deployment, and all had kind of come together for me.
Yeah. So how long were you in service?
I was in for 6 years. I did 2 different deployments. The first one was to Somalia on a ship called the USS Incheon, which was my first real experience kind of being deployed in that way, which was great. I came back for about a week, and then they re-stood up our detachment to go deploy to Haiti, which was exciting at that time. And then came back, stood down for a little bit, and then stood up again. And we were on the USS Kearsarge and stationed off the coast of Bosnia at the time. And came back and trained Marines for a year before I began the process of making the decision as to whether I wanted to stay in the service or whether I wanted to separate.
Yeah. So I want to talk about that a little bit, because that's a very common thing that we hear is, we'll talk to some guys who are kind of in that decision-making process, or they think they had made one decision and maybe the job market doesn't look the way they thought it did, or, vice versa, the position didn't come through that they wanted, that kind of thing. So what does that decision-making process look like? The decision to leave that type of career that is very, for all of its faults, very stable, sure, very organized to a degree. You kind of know what it takes to get to the next step and where to go. So how do you decide to leave that?
And very mission oriented. I think there was I don't know that I've ever been more proud than the day I graduated from boot camp and I earned that title. And going through boot camp is such an emotional experience in all the good ways and all the challenging ways. And at that point, in my case, I was like, I'm staying in for life. I'm going to be a drill instructor. I'm going to mold other future Marines. This is amazing. I got to my fleet assignments and I was like, okay, not going to be doing that, but this is pretty cool. I like this stuff. And then as I kept going through, I started to realize that I missed schoolwork. I missed the learning, and I missed sort of the independent capability, the individual contribution and room for advancement. And in my case, like, I have tremendous amount of respect for the military. My bride is also a Marine, so we're very proud of our service. But there was something about going to the newspaper to look up at the time whether you had earned a promotion or not, based on the law of large numbers and the needs of the Marine Corps. And for me, I thought, yeah, there's a lot more individual drive that I have. So the Marines and I were not going to be a good fit forever. So again, I was very proud to go in, and I was very happy to get out at the time, because I had made the decision to separate and to become a civilian and to take all that I had learned and really apply it. So for me, the challenge at first was like navigating this roller coaster of, gosh, I was so gung-ho about being in, and now some of that's waning a little bit, but I still love the Marine Corps, but it's not going to be my job, but it'll always be a part of me. Like, all that wrestling match that kind of takes place. The other challenge was that in making the decision in a 6-year enlistment, I probably still had a little over a year left. And I was like, oh no, I'm getting out and I'm going to be a 27-year-old freshman in college. That will not work. So for me, what that meant was I still had a little over a year to try to get myself ready for the next chapter. And where all my friends would go to the bars and hang out and drink, I would hit the books. And I took every test I could. I took classes on the ship and the shore and everything I could, trying to finish up my undergraduate degree, which I did. I got my degree the same month that I separated from military service, which allowed me eventually to go on to graduate school. And I feel like I almost caught up with life in that way. But that was a tough year of saying, I'm still here for a year and I know I'm not going to be here forever. That was mentally challenging, considering I had so many other things that I wanted to move on to, and I couldn't move on because they still owned my contract, obviously.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a challenge for a lot of people is because the transition period can be so long. It's how do I navigate this in between? How do I navigate the being here and planning for what's next, but not knowing what's next?
Correct. And I think that also, Jordana, one of the things that I had a really hard time with was I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I just knew that I wanted to be a civilian. So there was a part of me that was saying, you know, I've always been fascinated by psychology and the brain and all these kind. I thought I was going to be a neuroradiologist. Wow, doesn't that sound great? Let's
That's
go do
very
that.
specific.
Very specific. I was like fascinated by how the brain works. Well, when I started to do the research, I'm like, okay, you have to go to pre-med and medical school and residency and fellowship. It's like 13 more years of school. And I was already, you know, a 6-year enlistment into my adult life. And I had a young wife, and I thought, that's not going to be a good fit. So I was like, I don't really know what I want to do. So the transition support that the military gave me was very tactical, in the sense that it was, here are the forms you fill out. Here's how to weigh your U-Haul van. I'm like, okay, this is great, but I'm trying to figure out what I want to do with the rest of my life. And they said, well, here's a Myers-Briggs personality test. And here you get to figure
The
this out about
personality.
yourself. And I'm sitting in this auditorium with all these other separating Marines, and we're filling this thing out. And it comes back and it's like, well, here's some good job. I'm like, this is not helping. It's
Yeah.
absolutely not helping me.
Yeah. But I want to go back to something you said, though, because you talked about the job fit, right? You knew once you dug into really seeing what that, the radiologist position included, knowing this is not it. And we work with a lot of people who are kind of in that same situation, but they're worried about the position. Oh, I need to get the job. I need to get the money, the paycheck for the stability, and then I can make other decisions. But there's almost this urgency or desperation to just get the job.
Yes.
And the longer, if you don't take that year, if you don't, double book it,
Right.
it's harder because then you do feel up against the line. So did you feel any of that, the pressure at that point? Because it sounds like you were approaching it as like, I need to find what works for me, not just the paycheck, right?
Yeah, I started off trying to figure out, like, how do I find work? How do I participate in a job fair when I knew I was moving home, in this case, to where my bride grew up in Massachusetts, and I was down in North Carolina. So I was separating from Camp Lejeune. And I'm just like, how do I find a job in Massachusetts while I'm living in North Carolina? And this was before the internet was really a huge thing. So it was a lot more difficult then. And I was struggling a bit, and I went to a job fair, and they basically said the best job I had lined up for myself was to be an assistant manager of a muffler shop. I have no mechanical ability at all, Jordana. I have no, I don't,
Listeners, you can't see, if you're listening on audio, you can't see my face, but just imagine it right now. Like there's a whole lot going on right here.
it was terrible fit. And it really solidified for me that if I wasn't careful about the decision, I could land myself in a really tough spot. A
Right.
short term, scratching a short term itch could create a really long term problem. And so that really got my attention, that saying, if I'm not intentional about this part of my transition, if I don't call my own shot and put in the hard work to get myself ready, or if I try to solve one problem, I could invite, 5 other problems for myself. So for me, it was an act of compromise in a sense. I had to give up a lot of my social life and some of the other types of things I might have enjoyed doing, because I had to work nights and weekends, in addition to my full-time service job, to get ready for the transition. At the same time, when I was moving home, I had to, as a married, young former Marine, I had to move in with my mother-in-law because I was going to go to school. That was, my path meant that instead of working, I was going to be a full-time student to try to line up a job for my young family and all these kinds of things. And that was a real punch in the pride, so to speak, to have been, an active service member in hostile zones, earning hazardous duty pay and jump pay and all these kinds of things, to then have to, I don't want to say tuck my tail between my legs, but, realistically speaking, it's what the circumstances required. And she was very gracious about it. It wasn't a big deal at all. But for me, mentally, again, what you're hearing over and over again is that mental game of how do you ride that roller coaster and say, this is not great and not ideal, not kind of what I dreamed about, for the short term, but there's a longer term payoff here.
Right. And being able to see that, I think, then helps in some situations where you are dealing. I mean, there's a lot of emotions, and I don't think we talk about that enough in any big change, but especially one that is taking your entire life, your entire hierarchy of being, and breaking it down to nothing and saying, okay, now rebuild something, right? We're not talking about a job change here. We're talking about an entire life change for a lot of people.
Yes.
I don't think we explore that enough of the emotional aspect, and really how kind of that negative thinking can sink in and really start, eroding confidence or eroding different areas if you let it.
Totally. And I think some of the things that we learn in the military, we don't appreciate because we're just in it. We're just in it. And we have to be able to shift that mindset a little bit. So one quick example was when I was on the recon teams. These are 6-man teams, deploying as close as we can to where the action is, living out in the field for days at a time. And that was my team. Well, now that I was transitioning, my team changed. And so now my bride was part of that team. My mother-in-law was part of that team. And thankfully, I had their support, even though, I obviously had to provide for my family. At the same time, we were a team. And so we made the decision together, Tanya and I, that she was going to work while I went to school full time until I could go and get a better job. And then she could make her decision about what she wanted to do next. So she sacrificed to put me through grad school in that case. And so that was me leaning on a teammate in the form of my marriage in that case. And it's not altogether different from what we had to do to survive when we were in the service. But I think that communication, that trust, that willingness to be vulnerable, all that emotional stuff you're talking about, Jordana, it really was a requirement for us to be able to navigate some of the financial challenges, the time challenges, the not knowing what comes next and trusting the process. Like all that stuff had to happen.
Right. It's so interesting to me because, obviously I know a lot about you. Our listeners may or may not, depending on, how much they've followed, either you or Recon or any of our stuff. But it's interesting to hear the way that you speak about the past transition, knowing what you do now, right? You are all about the authenticity and, breaking down negative thinking and the growth mindset aspect, which is, a huge, huge piece of really being happy in life and really thriving in life, is learning to accept growth at all areas, no matter how painful it is. Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about how did you end up doing that? How did you become the Godfather?
Yeah, I think that in my case, it began with that immediate transition. So in my example, when I left the service, I knew by the time I left North Carolina, I had strong test scores in what's known as the Graduate Management Aptitude Test, which is the GMAT, which is a requirement to get into business school. And so I had really strong test scores. I had my accredited degree in hand from cobbling together all those classes and klepping out of things and Dante's and all these different programs the military had to try to give us college equivalency. And so I had all the credentials I needed to get accepted to grad school. So I fortunately knew I was where I was going to go. Once I got to business school, what I found was, in my case, as a married former Marine, life was exceptionally easy academically. Mm-hmm. Anything they threw at us was nothing compared to what I had just experienced in the service for 6 years. So that was pretty exciting for me to be able to manage the course load that was stressful to some of my civilian counterparts. And I was like, yeah, this is nothing. And that's where I really appreciated more, in my experience, what the Marines got right when it came to leadership, organizational excellence, individual empowerment, decision making, like the structure, everything. I had a new appreciation for it because I got to see it as almost look at it independently from a different perspective. And so I tried as best I could, as I took my first civilian jobs, in my case in the software world, to instill as much of the military type precision and value systems as I could into the teams that I built. And two things became immediately apparent as I started to make this transition now into being a civilian leader who had a former military background. The first was that it was really, parts of it were really appreciated by my team members. They just really felt like the dependability, reliability, the care in which a lot of the professionalism was there. It just instinctively came out of me. They really appreciated that because it was uncommon. And I think that as
Mhm.
military people, we need to understand how much, what we've learned by osmosis in some cases is really unusual in the civilian world. The second was that it wasn't a universal fit. There were some things and assumptions I made about treating civilians as if they're military people that was absolutely terrible. It just didn't work at all. One was the fact that I assumed everybody was as mission driven as me. I said, okay, I don't have a Marine Corps mission anymore, but now this software company's mission is my mission. Let's go. We're getting after this. And people are like, what are you talking about? No. And
Mhm.
the other is you just can't interact with people as directly, or there's not as much infrastructure. Uh, so you have to kind of slow down a little bit, take a little bit of a different tactic. You have to translate sort of what you're trying to accomplish and accomplish it in a very different way. So that's kind of a 50-50 thing, right? So half of what I had experienced and learned gave me a real advantage, but the other half I had to unlearn so that I could find a better way to connect with my civilian counterparts, which I found fascinating.
Yeah, the spoiler alert, civilian counterparts don't always care about the mission. There are a whole lot of people who are 9 to 5, pay me, and then we're done, right? And it's valid. It's a valid perspective on work, but if you come in assuming that the way that everything ran in the military is how it runs in the corporate world, which is the most structured that business gets outside of the military, into small businesses who kind of, oftentimes do whatever works. So, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, you then shifted into this field of talent optimization. What is it that you see veterans now that you know that side of, the business world, the corporate business world, all of that kind of stuff, and you kind of worked your way through it, so you knew all the middle parts of it too. What should our veterans and military spouses know about that shift, and especially about going into a civilian career that isn't always in those TAP programs, right?
Yeah, it's so true. And I think that while I was working and leading teams in a business sense, I came to really appreciate the leadership development and the organizational aspects more even than the technical work I was doing on those teams. So in my case, I decided to get my PhD in psychology, specifically studying leadership and coaching. And that was another 6 year chunk of my life to be able to study at the highest levels and contribute my own research and these sorts of things. But it was a testament to the fact that I just wanted work itself to become my mission. I wanted to figure out how to help workplaces work better for both economic reasons, but also for human reasons. I saw people struggling on teams and suffering and taking that home with them, and that bothered me. So I decided to make that my own personal mission. And to your point, when you think about what military people should know, is that a lot of thinking has gone into how to balance sort of two things. One is mission accomplishment. So the military is exceptionally good at accomplishing its own mission. Now I know that sometimes we we live through things, hurry up and wait, and things don't always seem so coordinated. But in the macro sense, generally speaking, the military is exceptionally good at what it sets out to do. So mission accomplishment was one, but the second was troop welfare, and being able to say that we care about getting to know our people, understanding their strengths and their limitations, insisting upon rest. I was taught very early on that no army can operate exclusively on offense. We have to fall into a recovery position from time to time. All these types of things that largely are not present in the civilian world even today, and are showing up in the forms of burnout and anxiety and depression and isolation. There's a real human toll that modern work is experiencing. And I think that just appreciating the fact that so much thought goes into military sort of governance and the way that we actually approach our work, I think is one important thing to point out.
Yeah. And it seems too that there's been a shift work wise in the civilian work world lately of that pushback of no, you're not. And a lot of this can be attributed to younger generations, really. They grew up, they're like, no, I'm not giving you my whole life. No, I'm not carrying an on-call cell phone around for 24 hours. No, I'm not going to do this, that kind of thing. So where do we need to start seeking that balance in the modern day workforce when you're coming out of something so structured as the military, going into something unquestionably structured to some degree, depending on the company and the leadership and the management and all of that. And knowing that there is kind of this tug of war that is happening right now between no, be a team player and get the work done, which veterans fall right into so often. And this other pull of, but also make sure you're taking care of yourself. Make sure you're spending time with your family, the other things that matter in your life.
Yes, and it's such a great point because you have to do the whole job, right? And that doesn't mean just mission accomplishment with no troop welfare, and it doesn't mean no troop welfare, but you don't happen to accomplish a mission. Like both of those things are unacceptable where we come from. And I think that to your point, we don't have as much infrastructure or structure around the work environment in the civilian world as we do in the military, even in large organizations. They're not quite the same in terms of having that woven into the fabric of our philosophies, our leadership principles, and these things. So what that means as a transitioning military member, you have to be prepared to provide it on your own. You have to continue on the ideals of what we've lived through and represented, but how it shows up now in a very different context. Now, if you're an individual contributor, as I was when I first got out of school and my very first civilian job, I had no direct reports. I wasn't even a team leader. And I said, well, I'm still a leader. There's no way anybody on the planet would have been able to convince me that I wasn't a leader after having been in the service for 6 years.
Right.
It's just that I could only lead myself and I could have a positive impact on my peers. I could learn the business. I could share my observations from talking to customers, whatever it might have been. So I was still a leader, even though I was leading in a very different context. Once I became a manager, okay, now I had responsibility for developing other leaders. Okay, great. That's now sounding much more familiar to me as an NCO. What did I experience when I was in the service? So you have to provide a lot of that structure yourself because it doesn't just necessarily come with, your environment, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah.
So for those of our listeners who are, they might be in that transition period, that year to 18 months right now. They might be, they might have been out and kind of doing the job hop situation, right? Where it's, oh, this is what I want to do, or I need the paycheck, and now I'm going to switch to something I like, but I don't like that, or I don't like this person, or what have you. What would your advice, knowing the talent side, knowing what companies are looking for and what they need in order to function, what is your advice to them?
Yeah, this is where I really think that this holistic approach that you take with Recon Network is so important because to me, it really comes down to three things. One is, I call this production, people, and purpose. The first one around production is, you have to put yourself in a position where you can do good work. If you take a job that's not a natural fit for your strengths, it's hard to do that good work. So knowing who you are, reconciling what you're really good at, not convincing yourself that a sales job pays good money if you hate selling, like that's not going to be good for you in the long run, right? So knowing sort of what you're bringing to the table, where your active areas of interest and learning are, make sure that you can perform at a high level. The part about when it comes to people, you're talking about engagement and wellness and belonging, knowing that you're joining a company and feeling like there's a sense of the culture is a good fit for you, that you enjoy the people that you're interviewing with, that you feel like this feels like home kind of thing. Really, really important. And ensuring that you're taking care of yourself. Like self-care is never selfish. And I think a lot of times in the military, we pride ourselves on being tough, but it's a phony tough if we're actually depleted and we act like we're not. That's not leadership. That's something else entirely. So to me, knowing when you need a beat, knowing when you're saying, you know what, I've been doing the job search for 3 weeks. I'm in a job that I hate. Take a week off from the job search. You'll be fine. Like it'll be okay. But if you
Right.
just grind and grind and grind, then that's not the right energy, to bring into the long term. Always trying to think long term, right? It's not about winning the battle, it's about winning the war. So the last one being around purpose, I think, is where we really, in my case as a meditator, I like to get still. I like to get quiet. I like to sit, take myself offline, so to speak, and really just kind of see what emerges. And that's been my way. And not everyone's into meditation, of course. Maybe it's a walk in the woods. Maybe it's listening to music. Maybe whatever it is that helps you kind of connect with that deepest part of yourself and really try to listen without speaking, that inside voice of ours, and see what emerges as purpose. What are you really excited about naturally? What are you called to do? How can you find work that aligns with that in some way? If you think the world should be beautiful and creative and vibrant and alive, then even painting houses could be a part of that, right? Or if you're into like I see a world that's super well organized, everything has its place. Like that's not my type, but maybe if that's your type, then I love that for you. And finding a job that's all about logistics and making sure the trains run on time. Perfect, perfect. How do you find meaning and purpose and making an impact in what you do? And my encouragement, Jordan, is get greedy about that. If it truly comes from a selfless part of you and it's all about purpose and it's pure in that way, then you don't have to worry about being greedy, about wanting as much of that as you can in your day-to-day work. Right. It's when we put our thumb on the scale and we start to manipulate things like I want to, make more money this way, or I want to have this type of title or this corner office. That's when we kind of sully things a little bit. And then, we run the risk of being greedy. But I think that in terms of pure purpose, and we realize like how we're naturally wired and how we're attuned to sort of what we want to see in the world, we don't have to worry about that. We can be greedy and work hard for that and try to align ourselves with that and accept that maybe I'll take a little less money if I can have the job that fills my cup and makes me feel a sense of purpose. Or maybe I don't have to have, the things I thought were important to me that now all of a sudden in this lens, they're not.
Right. Well, you hit my heart every time you start talking about purpose, because that's where we kind of thrive in what we do. And I do. I really like what you said. Like it is okay to be greedy with that, and understand too. I'll kind of piggyback on that when you are in your purpose and you're being as greedy as possible so you can do as much of your purpose as possible, so you can live as fully in yourself as possible, you're benefiting the world. Like that's where you really start affecting and having that ripple effect on the world around you. So I love that. Everybody go be greedy. Be
Yeah.
greedy with your purpose. I love it.
There's no way if you get quiet and you think about your purpose and it comes back like, I want the most for me. That's not purpose. That's not what's going to come through. So I think that certainly we're a part of that equation. Obviously, we need to have the right job and we need to make a certain amount of money, or we need to have certain needs met. We totally get that. But beyond that basic self-interest that keeps you sort of in the game, make the game about the mission. Make the game about the other people who you are serving with and who you're serving, and you'll be just fine. I think that's the thing that's where I believe trust the process really works well, is being able to see that and say mission accomplishment, troop welfare. What you didn't hear in those two things is me, me, me. That is not something that you might see pieces of that in the military, of course, and we've all had those people that are part of the reporting structure. But I think in general, and from ideals and principles, those two things are selfless: mission accomplishment and troop welfare. There's not a lot of me in that. And that's the approach I encourage veterans who are transitioning to take as well. Yes, you have to meet your basic needs, but beyond that, get excited, get greedy about your impact and your chance to work with some exceptional people, help them be better in a way that makes you better. Just spill out those ripples that Jordana you're talking about. I love it. It's an exciting time. There's natural energy. There's fear. There's anxiety. I get that too. But there's so much energy in transitions. We want to tap into that energy and funnel it towards things that can be really good, not just for ourselves, but for our extended families and even out into the world.
Yeah. I 100% agree and endorse this podcast and this discussion, because I absolutely love it. And it's always wonderful to hear someone talking about the stillness and the mindfulness as well. Just being able to if you can sit with yourself, you can have some of the hardest discussions on the face of the earth. So
Very true.
I'm a firm believer in that. So, Matt, I really want to thank you for being here today. To all of our listeners, if you have a chance, we've got his LinkedIn connection or link in the bios in the notes. So definitely check that out. Connect with Matt. You've got a lot. I mean, he's got a great book out there, great podcast, better than this one. So go listen to that kind of stuff. Connect with him. Matt, thank you so much for your time today. I truly, truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Jordana. Really appreciate you and all that you're doing for veterans everywhere.
Absolutely. That's our purpose. So that's what we're here for. So, all right. Thank you guys for listening. Please check us out everywhere you can get a podcast or on YouTube where you can see Matt and my pretty faces. And more episodes to come. We'll see you in a few weeks. Thanks so much.